stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny
Hello. Howdy. Welcome to the AHNC Daily News Rodeo. Or is it the other way around? Whatever. I'm your host, Hat. Welcome. First of all, folks, for those of you who missed us yesterday, my apologies. I thought I had made it clear Friday that I would not be on the following Monday, but obviously I didn't do it well enough. Some of you showed up, and I was not to be found. My apologies. The good news is, though, the appointment went well, even though I did try to kill a lady in a revolving door. That's a whole nother story. I can't tell without breaking it down into tears. Let's just say it was a really awful experience. But the nodule on my thyroid has not grown at all. The composition has not changed at all. So I'm going to get another ultrasound in 6 months. And after that, it'll probably be a yearly look at it just to be sure. So all good news there. I do apologize very much, by the way, for the volume blowing out at the beginning. One of my videos today, I had to crank the gain up quite a bit to get it to work. And I forgot to reset it once I started playing Learning Curve, so my bad. I will not include Learning Curve in the Rumble and Gab TV uploads today, so I don't blow people's ears out when they listen to it later. Another programming note, today will be one straight show. I'm not going to break it up into two pieces. I have a huge block on gun violence. Not so much specifically what happened yesterday in Boulder, Colorado, which is, of course, an immense tragedy. They all are. Every shooting is. I don't care how many people are involved. I don't care who's involved. They're all tragedies in one way or another. Someone's life is lost and someone's hurt by that. That's how tragedies work. But I do want to get into Biden's recent speech about gun control, what he's looking to do. I did hear, by the way, just before I went live, that Jen Psaki said in a press conference that Biden is not ruling out executive action or an executive order regarding gun control. Let's see how far that flies. But so a lot on that. I've got some pieces on, in fact, coming right up, there was a horrible nursing home fire in upstate New York today that I've got some video of. And And then also, of course, the border crisis. Things have gotten even worse. The White House has finally released some pictures, but still no plans for 46 Asterisk or Harris to visit the border. In fact, Harris was asked about it, and she laughed about not going. But that's something we'll get into near the end of the show. All right, so we're going to need them today. Our Babylon Bee bookends. Here's the first one, the one on the left from their Worldviews section. Neighbors with Black Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, and Hispanic Lives Matter yard signs getting awfully close to All Lives Matter. And here we can see a very nice lush green lawn in front of a very nice home with those three aforementioned signs right there in the lawn. And let's see here. Dateline, Ann Arbor, Michigan. According to sources, some residents of a local upper-class suburb have accumulated Black Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter, and Asian Lives Matter signs in their perfectly manicured front yards. Experts warn, however, that with the addition of more people groups every day, they're getting dangerously close to saying all lives matter. We need to guard against this, said local sociology professor Dr. Dam Duncatelli, as she added a Trans Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter sign in her front yard. Continuing the quote, we have to make sure that as we add more minorities, we stop short of the damnable heresy of all lives matter. Close quote. Some scientists have warned that affluent white suburbanites could run out of lawn space for all the signs very soon. Said Duncatelli, limited space is a growing concern. And Duncatelli also identifies as a scientist. Thankfully, a solution has been promised to help cut down on-yard signage. Many have discovered they can get the same message across by putting up a single sign that simply says, white men are the worst. Brilliant, says the Babylon Bee. By the way, I don't know if you saw, but they were referred to by the New York Times just the other day as a right-wing disinformation site. And in that article, the Times links to a piece backing up their claim. And if you follow that link, it goes to a piece they wrote about the Babylon Bee where they call it a satire site. I'm not kidding you. Another beautiful cell phone by the New York Times, except this time you're looking at something called unfair trade practices or perhaps defamation. So the Babylon Bee is seriously looking at suing the New York Times, and I wish them all the best. Okay, so my personal conceit, the daily look at the market. Not a good day for investors in the market, folks. Every major index was down across the board. The Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ were all down at least 0.75%. The NASDAQ actually being down over a full percent. The Dow breaking well below 32,500. So we are nowhere near the record territory we saw just a week ago. And gold took a slip, not quite a full percentage point. And oil, big surprise. Oil was down a full 6.5% plus, or almost $4, or I should say over $4 a barrel, closing at $57.54 per barrel of West Texas Intermediate sweet crude. A real knock in the shorts. And that has to do with, I wasn't able to watch it, but I guess Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, and Fed Chairman Powell had some remarks in front of Congress today, and it didn't go well as far as the market's concerned. But we'll see if I can get some more details on that for tomorrow. I'll be happy to share them with you. Electric Dog says in the D-Live chat, New York Times is satire at this point, but perfectly put, sir. Perfectly put. And thank you, Ray, so much. Welcome. Nice to see you. Okay, I never go to the Washington Post, but today I had to. I absolutely had to, because they did a really good story for a change on one of my favorite topics, which is the slumping numbers in mainstream media. You'll know that they have been falling off fairly consistently over the last few months, and then when the January 6th riot happened, their ratings exploded, certainly during the impeachment hearings, trials. There were no hearings. The impeachment trials, things went up and over the top. But they have been cooling off like an ice age ever since. And the reason I picked the Washington Post specifically instead of another article from another outlet outlining what the Post said here is because the Post even includes itself in the downturn, believe it or not. But let's get to the headline. Trump predicted news ratings would, quote, tank if I'm not there. He wasn't wrong. Yes, folks, the Washington Post admitting that Donald J. Trump was right about something. As much as it pains them, they couldn't avoid staring down this particular barrel of this particular gun. This is written by their one Paul Farhi, an insane person. Let me just skip to the track here. After a record-setting January, traffic to the nation's most popular mainstream news sites, including the Washington Post, plummeted in February, according to the audience tracking firm ComScore. The top sites were also generally doing worse than in February of last year, when the pandemic became a major international news story. Here's my favorite part. The Post, for example, referring to themselves, saw the number of unique visitors fall 26% from January to February and 7% from a year ago. New York Times lost 17% compared with January and 16% over last February. Now, when we get to cable news, CNN. After surpassing rivals Fox News and MSNBC in January, CNN lost 45%. Folks, that's 45% of its primetime audience in the past 5 weeks, according to Nielsen Media Research. MSNBC's audience has dropped 26% in the same period. Fox News, they've lost a total of 6% over the same time period. They are now back firmly in the number one spot. Is this schadenfreude or is this just pure good news? I'll leave it up to you to decide. I've got to raise the Trovo chat here a little bit. Excuse me just a second. I've got it down too low and I can't see it through the camera. All right, let me raise that up there. Uncle Bobbity's making great points. Uncle Bobbity says in the Trovo chat, clearly not noteworthy. All right, continuing right along. So I teased this a second ago. There was a major nursing home fire in New York earlier today. I do not have any details on casualties. I do understand that at one point there were a number of people missing, including one firefighter. As you'll see in the video I'm about to play, it is a very, very horrific blaze, and you can see the entire building is basically consumed, except for a small portion of the back. This is obviously in the rear where the emergency staircases are, and they are completely buckled by the heat, and the building is, I would say, about 80 to 90% consumed. I'll tell you right now, my hometown is a hotbed of arsonists, no pun intended. Buildings burnt down all the time because we had nothing to do. In fact, I'll tell an honest story. I tried to burn a building down once when I was 12, but I didn't know what I was doing, so it didn't happen. But I honestly did try to burn down an old structure from a defunct wood construction plant, wood sales, lumber sales. That's it. Yeah, lumber sales. Guys, my memory's shot. But yeah, it was an old lumber sales yard, and they had a structure, and I tried to light it on fire with a few matches. I failed. Thank God, I failed. Probably would have killed myself. Anyway, let me play you some video from this fire in this in New York. I have to real quickly raise the gain here on OBS. And again, my apologies for having it up incorrectly earlier. Thanks to my technical director, Electric Dog, for pointing it out. I just got to it way too late. All right. Okay, so here we go. So as you can see, there's some furniture, some lawn furniture that's completely consumed. There's a small portion of the house to the right side. Let me fast forward over to that. You can see a small portion of it has not gotten in yet. But I'll tell you, once a fire gets to this point, you don't even dump water on it anymore. You just try to keep the surrounding homes from catching on fire from the radiant heat from that fire. That's all you can do, is to pour water on those homes, because there's no way you're going to stop that structure from going down. There's just no way. It's a horrible tragedy. And I'll try to have details tomorrow on that. So another thing was at least live when I was putting the show together, and that was an incident in Rochester, New York. You'll remember, of course, we covered the Daniel Prude story last year. Daniel Prude was a black man who was high on PCP, running around downtown Rochester naked last winter, a year ago, back in, I believe, March of 2020. And he was breaking windows with his bare arm. He was cut all over the place, bleeding like mad. The police showed up. They got him on the ground, and he started spitting at them, yelling that he had COVID. And he was saying, "Give me your gun, I'm going to kill myself." The guy was completely out of it, so they handcuffed him. They put a spit bag over his head. And again, if you're not familiar, spit bags are basically gauze. They're completely porous. You can breathe through them just fine, but you can't spit through them. That's the whole point. You keep spitting, you just get it on yourself. Bit of a deterrent, one would hope. But Prude ultimately became unresponsive. He was taken to the hospital, and he died about a week later. The autopsy showed PCP in his system, so the cause of death was most obviously excited delirium, which is a very, very horrible physical state that you can be in when you're high on certain drugs, including fentanyl and meth and PCP. It increases your heart rate, it increases your blood pressure, all kinds of horrible things happen. Normally, it's a massive heart failure, but because of the way it happens, it's very difficult to diagnose just through pure physical examination. You need to put the toxicology and the behavioral aspects all together with the physical findings, and then you can start to find excited delirium as cause of death. What has most often been related as cause of death in these cases is due, at least in part, to restraint by the police, when in fact that's the only thing they could have done, because if they had left Prude unrestrained, he would have probably tried to kill all of them, grab one of their guns, and just started shooting. And he said he was going to. So you have to take people at their word, even if they're out of their minds. But Prude did die. Now, what happened after was the real tragedy. For some reason, the mayor of Rochester, who is black, and the police chief, who are black, they hid the body cam footage of the officers who were involved with the arrest. And there were a number of officers at the scene. They hid the body cam footage. It was only leaked later, and it went viral on social media. And then there were riots. I'm sure you all remember the Rochester riots. We covered them pretty extensively. There was a lot of destruction, a lot of injury. Rochester has not really calmed down since. And so it blew up again today. There was a big BLM march. At least 150, 200 people gathered downtown. They marched along one of the main streets into a neighborhood. And then they crowded around a place called Wiegand's. And Wiegand's is a grocery store. And as you can see, it's a very nice grocery store. It's in a nice neighborhood. As you can also see, there is a crowd of people absolutely slammed up against the doors to this establishment. They started trying to force their ways in, and security, who as I understand it are off-duty Rochester PD, were able to lock the doors in time. But unfortunately, even though you're locking the troublemakers out, you're locking all of the store-goers in. And last I read on what was happening is that these protesters were setting up food stands in the parking lot driveway, so they could eat and drink and not have to leave the area. And again, at last report, the police were nowhere to be found except to be blocking some traffic. I don't have any more on this, but I searched hard and wide, but could not find up with any more. This right here is footage from one Citizen Murphy, from his iPhone. He was reporting on this march from when it started. So again, something going on right now. So another thing we've been talking about, and again, this is going to be a little disjointed today. I really had to dive into the gun thing when Biden mouthed off earlier. So this is not my normal putting things together as well as I usually do. But another thing we've been dealing with these past couple weeks, really since November, is Iowa 2. You remember Iowa 2 was a race for that congressional district, a U.S. congressional district, and the winner was Republican Rita Hart. There were a number of recounts. There was a recanvass, and the Iowa Elections Board ultimately certified Rita Hart as, Mariette Miller Meeks as the winner. Mariette Miller Meeks was the winner, the Republican. Rita Hart is the Democrat. Please forgive me. So Miller Meeks was declared the winner after winning by a total of 6 votes. 6 votes. Okay, good. Now, Rita Hart had not challenged any legalities during the recounts. She had not brought in any legal challenges. They had just gone with recounts. And she lost. 6 votes. I'm sorry, but you lost. So now, Miller Meeks is seated in the House. Rightfully so. She was sworn in back in January, just like all the other newbies. Well, here's the thing. Initially, Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, said that she wasn't going to use the little-known rule where the ruling party in the House can actually vote to oust the legally elected member and replace them with the loser. Believe it or not, that's a House rule. It's happened before. We've talked about it before. McCloskey from Indiana, if I'm not, or was it Ohio? I believe it was one of those two. But McCloskey, the Democrat, was seated. He was the incumbent, and he lost to a Republican. And the House, I believe it was Tip O'Neill, put McCloskey in instead. And that became a very, very, very contentious thing, and really the bonhomie between the two sides in the House that had existed pretty much decently up to that point was gone, and was pretty much gone for good after that. It was a real stupid move on the Democrats' part. But initially, Pelosi said, "I'm not going to do it." Miller Meeks won, and we're going to leave it at that. But recently, within the last couple weeks, suddenly Pelosi has been making noise that maybe they might do it after all. In fact, this has been referred to a particular committee that rules on such things. I don't remember the name of the committee outright, but it is, of course, run by Democrats, as are all the committees in the House, since they have the majority, even though it's only by something like 10 or 12 votes. But that's, again, how it works. If you're in the majority, you get to rule the committees. And it looks like the person in charge of the committee is very much in favor of ruling that Rita Hart should be given the seat. And they're going to kick Miller Meeks out. And Pelosi was asked about this specifically just the other day, and she basically said, well, all options are on the table, which is Democrats speak for, we're probably going to do the worst thing possible for the good of the country. So let's see what happens there. But Nancy doesn't have the backing of all of her caucus on this one. She does not have every Democrat vote in her pocket. And I've got a couple tweets here regarding that. This first is by Representative Dean Phillips. He's a Democrat. And Representative Phillips tweeted, and I quote, "Losing a House election by 6 votes is painful for Democrats, but overturning it in the House would be even more painful for America. Just because a majority can does not mean a majority should." Actual words of wisdom from a Democrat. God bless you, Representative Phillips. God bless you. Another representative who has come out in that same vein is Democrat New Hampshire Representative Pappas. And to quote him, "This election result was certified by the state of Iowa, and Representative Miller Meeks was sworn in nearly 3 months ago. It's time to move on." So, chinks in the armor of the Pelosi caucus. I have to see how if this dam, if I may mix my metaphors, breaks further. And hello, Laura, to the chat. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. So, speaking of Congress, we know that they rammed through the $2 trillion, and I'll explain why I said 2 in a second, the $2 trillion stimulus bill, which was anything but stimulus. It was a big bailout for Democrat-run municipalities and states who don't know how to budget, who don't know how to provide for their insanely overpaid public sector unions. In fact, Governor DeSantis had a real shot against Biden and Harris last week when he explained how this last stimulus bill cost Florida about $2 billion. and money they didn't get and money they wound up paying out to the blue states. As Governor DeSantis put it, this bill, this resolution, this law hands out money if you screwed up your economy, locked down your state, and killed more people than states who didn't. It rewarded that exact behavior more than states who did the right thing. And he's exactly correct. We talked about that several times. The reason I call it a $2 trillion stimulus and not the 1.9 that you heard everyone say is because it was basically a $2 trillion bill. 1.9 is their way of rounding down and making you think it wasn't as much as it was. Again, whenever someone asks you how much you paid for gas, you will say, if it said $2.55 and 99 hundredths of a cent at the pump, you'll say you paid $2.55. You won't round up and say $2.56. That penny makes a difference in your mind. If it didn't, you would round up and say $2.26. Same with that quote-unquote stimulus bill, or porculus, as Dan Bongino calls it. It was $2 trillion, period. So now, the Democrats have been hyping their next series of carve-outs to blue states, to big interests, and that is the, infrastructure package. Man, I can't remember anything. The infrastructure package, right now they're spitballing it between $3 and $4 trillion. So you can probably expect it to be more like $4.5 trillion. I'm guessing. Now, we already know all the problems with the last bill. It was supposed to be a coronavirus relief bill, a Wuhan virus relief bill, when in fact about 8 or 9% of it actually went towards COVID-related stuff. The rest of it was handouts. Handouts to blue cities, blue states, handouts to single mothers or women who would like to become single mothers. It would incentivize them to have children out of wedlock, just like welfare did in 1965. We've talked about that statistic over and over again, how motherless child rates in the black community have over tripled since the Great Society was passed. They're close to 77% now for fatherless children, fatherless homes in the black community. And we'll get into something that ties into that in the gun section of the program. But the Democrats can't get this thing through in one big push because it won't all fit under reconciliation. According to the article I just read, the Democrats only have one more shot at reconciliation this year. One more shot. So what they're talking about doing is breaking this infrastructure package up into 3 or 4 smaller bites and then trying to get bipartisan support for each of those. Now, they don't need bipartisan support if they kill the filibuster. So once again, we're staring right into the faces of the West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and the Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema. They have both promised, sworn almost, that they would not vote to end the filibuster. And if only one of them doesn't vote to end it, then it doesn't happen. Both of them is completely insurmountable because no Republican would certainly vote for it. And if one did, God help them come 2022 if they're up for election. God help them. But it remains to be seen what exactly is going to be in this bill. But you can expect hundreds of billions of dollars to be thrown at green energy, green infrastructure, and again, how are we going to pay for all the electricity to power those 500,000 new charging stations that we're proposing? 500,000 new charging stations across the country. Wind and solar are not going to power those. We need nuclear. If you want to go zero carbon by 2035, you've got to build nuclear and shut the F up. That's all there is to it. Nothing else will work. I've heard of something called thorium salt reactors. I don't know anything about them. I've heard them mentioned several times on Tim Pool's podcast. They're supposed to be very efficient and very, very low, if any, waste, radioactive waste. But I have not had the time to really dive into that. So if you could look into that yourselves, feel free. If I can find a moment here or there, I'll do my best to get into it. But if they want this infrastructure package through in the way they're talking about, they're going to have to kill the filibuster. And we'll get into the gun control block in a few more stories. And they may not need to wait for the infrastructure package before they do that. More on that in a moment. So Mitch McConnell is, of course, right out in front of this infrastructure proposal. He called the last bill, the porkless bill, a Trojan horse, and he's saying the exact same thing about this one. He says it's going to be massive tax hikes and job killing. We already know that 46 Asterisk has promised. He promised last year that he was going to raise taxes. He looked a voter right in the face and said, some people say they're going to cut your taxes. I'm going to raise your taxes. There was no denying what he said. And he's never backed off from it either. He's made no bones about it. They want to raise the corporate tax rate. They want to raise the capital gains tax rate. They want to include a wealth tax. We talked about that. That would basically make everything you own taxable above and beyond the taxes you've already paid on it. Property taxes, your home went up in value. Almost everyone's home has gone up in value over the last year. Virtually everyone's home has gone up in value, especially if you live in Florida or Texas. Oh my gosh, have the property rates gone up. Arizona close to that. But it's... I lost my train of thought. Let's see. Oh yeah, tax raises. They're talking about putting taxes on stock trades. Actual stock trade taxes, which would kill the small investor. They want to raise the gas tax. Insanely chosen Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg has said he is not against putting on a higher gas tax, which is a regressive tax that also affects the lower income people much more than it affects higher income people, because everyone pays the same extra amount. So the lower you make, the less you'll be able to afford it. They also want to get the $15 an hour minimum wage through. They may try to do that in the infrastructure package. I don't know for a fact, but they may try to do that. And we talked about how that would kill about just under 1.5 million jobs, while possibly raising about 600,000 to 800,000 people, quote unquote, out of poverty. Okay, so we're going to raise that many out while putting almost almost twice as many out of a job. Good plan. And it would make prices go up. And you'll remember Jen Ulian-Saki saying last week, hilariously, that just because corporations would see their taxes go up didn't mean they'd have to raise their prices. Like every corporation in America would be more than happy to just eat the extra taxes and watch their bottom line shrink even more. Not how it works, folks. Not how it works. And even if Amazon and Walmart and AT&T and all those people decided, yeah, we can absorb the extra hit. We won't raise our prices. What about the local restaurant that has 4 waitresses, a cook, and a counter person on staff? And you take away their ability to earn tips and you instead make them $15 an hour employees. Well, now your costs have quadrupled. So you're either going to have to cut their hours or cut back service or raise your prices. And as prices go up, your ability to buy things on the same amount of income goes down. So even though you're making more money, if your minimum wage got hiked, your buying power has been reduced. And it ultimately works out to be a net zero. If you get to keep your job. If you get to keep your job, it ultimately works out to a net zero. Happens time and time again. Also, high minimum wage, in fact, minimum wage in general, forces out low-skilled, low-education people from the job market. If I have to pay you $15 an hour, and I can choose between a guy who got good grades in high school and has a year of community college under his belt, but still doesn't know where he wants to go, or a young girl who never finished high school but has great potential and knows where she wants to go in life, I'll choose the guy with more education because he's a safer bet. That's how it works. It's how it's always worked. Thomas Sowell nailed this decades ago when he talked about how the minimum wage just killed jobs in the black community. Just killed it. And that's what that would do too. So this infrastructure package, there's going to be a lot written about it. There's going to be a lot of work on it. And it'll be interesting to see how the House handles it. Because as you know, the House has been passing bills left and right without any committee hearings whatsoever. They write the bill in secret with no input from the Republicans. And Pelosi just puts it in for a vote on the floor. It passes by 10 seats, maybe a little less, if some Democrats vote against it, and it goes to the Senate. And if the filibuster doesn't stay intact, everything's going to pass from here on out. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. So, Killer Cuomo, which I believe is the phrase that got me demonetized on YouTube. For those of you who are... Oh, I hadn't had the YouTube chat up. Excuse me. For those of you talking to me on YouTube, please forgive me. And the YouTube chat is empty right now, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, I do apologize for ignoring you up to this point, though. But let me take a drink here. Still got some sweet tea left from lunch. But Killer Cuomo is now under federal investigation for more than just the nursing home policy. He's also under federal investigation for potentially lying to the feds about the number of deaths that had occurred when the feds first questioned New York about their nursing home policy last late spring, early summer. I believe it was around June when they first made their inquiry to New York State about their nursing home death numbers. And we, of course, famously heard that one of the people on Cuomo's staff had a phone call with lawmakers, and she told them, almost literally, we hid the numbers from the feds because we didn't want to get into trouble. And then by extension, though she didn't say this, we didn't want to hurt the governor's chances of having a great deal on his book. Because you remember Cuomo wrote this great book, which is basically a hagiography. Is that how it's pronounced, or is it hagiography? I always thought it was hagiography, which is basically, complete one-sided love. This was self-love about his great handling of the coronavirus crisis in New York, when in fact they had the highest death rate pretty much in the world. The highest death rate per million in the world was New York. And the nursing homes were a big, 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 big part of that. At last count, at least 1,000 extra deaths are attributable to that March directive to put COVID-positive patients in nursing homes with no opportunity to refuse them. And let's not forget, Cuomo's not the only one who did it. Murphy in New Jersey did it. Whitmer in Michigan did it. California, Newsom did it. And Pennsylvania, I can never remember the governor of Pennsylvania, but he did it too. So it wasn't just Cuomo. That's the only one getting the news right now, though we talked about Michigan and the chance for a special prosecutor coming up. So we'll have to see what happens there. But, of course, the thing that's been sucking all the oxygen out of the room for the last couple months has been the sexual harassment allegations. And in one case, an actual sexual assault allegations. Cuomo supposedly touched a staffer quite inappropriately. And that has been elevated to a criminal investigation, as I understand it. But Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who is a political animal. I'm not saying she doesn't have a public justice bone in her body, but she is looking to become governor, or as we would say in Texas, fixin' to become governor. And the more she can take down Cuomo, the better her chances are. And she has taken this for all it's worth. So Letitia James has created an quote-unquote independent panel to look into these allegations, both nursing home and sexual, against Killer Cuomo, and to see where they go. Now, the last time there was a big independent agency looking into, or commission, if you will, looking into actions in New York, it was the Albany Commission some years ago that was looking into the incredible den of corruption that is Albany, New York. And it was moving along swimmingly. A lot of things were happening. And then it started getting close to Cuomo's office. And then suddenly that commission didn't exist anymore. Boom, it was Cuomo dismantled it. Scattered the ashes to the four winds, never to be seen again. So you're thinking, well, maybe this time's different. No, this time is not different. This time is not different at all. I've got an article from CNBC here, Dan Mangan. Title is Cuomo Trying to Interfere with AG's Sexual Harassment Probe, according to a lawyer from an accuser. The lawyer, Deborah Katz, in the letter to Attorney General Letitia James, objected to a report that Cuomo's office has provided, quote, in-house attorneys to staff members to meet with them before they are questioned by James investigators. Katz also warned that the involvement of in-house lawyers from Cuomo's office, quote, will almost certainly deter those with relevant information about, close quote, Charlotte Bennett and others' allegations from coming forward. So what Deborah Katz is saying is that these in-house lawyers are not only interviewing these witnesses as they're being called before the panel, but they're also representing them in front of the panel. So Cuomo has literal eyes and ears in on every one of these questioning sessions. Every single one of them involving a New York government staffer. How is that not putting not only your thumb, but your entire left cheek on the scale of justice? Seriously. If there was ever an obvious example of intimidation from the top down, that's it. That's it. Electric Guy says, watching on Trovo but chatting on DLive. I understand that Trovo has much better sound, so I can understand why you would do that. I can't vouch for the video, though. I haven't been able to really compare those two very well. Uncle Bobbity says in the Trovo chat, America will be dragged kicking and screaming into third world California status by 3 million, by 3 mil by every means necessary. Do you mean by the year 3000? Interesting. I think I see what you're saying, though. Even if it's not a specific date, the fact that we've been told over and over again that the United States is basically California 3 years away is more been proven right every time. And I'd like to thank all of you in DLive for the excellent contributions. Thank you. All right, moving. Oops, wrong screen. Excuse me just a second. Got confused as to where I was. Okay, a little COVID news, real briefly. AstraZeneca's vaccine has been all over the news for the past few weeks. First, there were reports of blood clots, some fatal, in certain people after they had gotten the AstraZeneca jab. And Europe, a big portion of it, had stopped giving the AstraZeneca vaccine after those reports started coming out. Now, last week, the EU's chief medical officer said that their determinations have been that the AstraZeneca vaccine is not to blame for these blood clot deaths, that their incidence in the population is no higher than it would be if they hadn't gotten the vaccine, that the stats are basically the same. They did not say, however, that the jab is completely and utterly 100% safe. What they said, though, was that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine far outweigh any detriments that may occur. Now, in other news, a bunch of people at a particular school district here in the U.S. just got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and they had to close the school because over half of those who got the vaccine couldn't report to work the next day. They came down with the typical flu-like symptoms after getting one of these vaccines that are fairly regular. I'm not saying rampant, but fairly regular. They happen often enough to notice. And they all had to call in sick. A couple people said they were fine 12 hours later. A couple more people said that it held them down for several days. But that is not unknown to these vaccines. But the AstraZeneca vaccine has just made some more news. I've got an article here from today by Zachary Steiber from the Epoch Times. It seems that the data that AstraZeneca and Cambridge gave to the U.S. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, regarding having AstraZeneca's jab be given emergency use authorization here in the U.S. Some of that data seems to be out of date. Now, they don't say specifically what data and how out of date, but according to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the board, which monitors trials and reviews data collected at regular intervals, quote, expressed concern that AstraZeneca may have included outdated information from that trial, their initial trial, which may have provided an incomplete view of the efficacy data. Now, Dr. Fauci said this is likely a very good vaccine. But he continued, this is on Good Morning America, by the way. The man is... Let me interrupt myself for a second. 4 years ago, just 4 years ago, if you had seen a picture of Dr. Anthony Fauci, which was available on the internet, after all, he's head of the NIAID, so it would have been easy to find him. If you had looked at a picture of him and a picture of Melania Trump and said that within 4 years, Fauci would have appeared on literally infinitely more magazine covers than Melania Trump did. If someone had made you a bet, would you have taken that bet? I would have. If you had said in November 2016 that this guy, here's his picture, this 70-plus-year-old guy, this little Jewish guy from, Italian guy, this little Italian guy from Brooklyn, would be on more magazine covers by an infinite variable than Melania Trump, I would have laughed my ass off. But it's in fact absolutely correct. Because Melania was on 0, and the fact that Fauci has been on more than 0, that's infinitely more. just by pure scientific notation. But so we'll have to see what's going on with AstraZeneca. It has not gotten emergency use. It's very hard to say that word with this plate. Emergency use authorization yet. So this is most likely going to delay it. But we'll have to see by how much. So there's no free lunch with this thing, folks. There's no free lunch. So also, speaking of COVID, speaking of Fauci, and then speaking of masks. You all know that if I have to wear a mask, I prefer this. It's a Make Right N95. That's what I wear. And then if I go to Northwestern, I have to wear one of their masks, one of their paper masks, in front of that, because that's how they roll. Okay, I'm not going to get shot over that, so I comply. Now, the big thing a few weeks ago was wearing 2 masks was better than none at all. And we all were like, oh, okay, well, great. If the CDC says so. And then we found out that the CDC's testing to prove that 2 masks were better than 1 was spraying an aerosol bottle at a mask on the head of a dummy. The face of a dummy, excuse me. And that was their scientific method of determining that 2 masks were better. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong. YouTube, listen to me. I'm not saying 2 masks don't work better. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem that the study they gave us is as scientifically valid as something, say, actually measuring infection rates between people who wear 1 mask versus people who wear 2 masks. I'm just saying. Give me that. You got to give me that. But YouGov did a survey on wearing masks. here in the U.S. And this is an article from their data journalist, Huang Nguyen. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Nguyen. I'm pretty sure that's pronounced Nguyen. That's Vietnamese. And Huang has this piece here. This is a Yahoo News YouGov poll. And oh my God, what the hell's going on here? This is from This is from last year. I just noticed this is from last year. That's not the story I wanted. That is not the story. Okay, let's just kill that story. Let's just kill that story. Pretend I didn't say a word. I told you today was going to be weird, and I didn't lie. All right. Let me change order here. I'm going to do this story first, then I'll get to Israel. Masterpiece Cake Shop. Masterpiece Cake Shop, Colorado, right? Christian baker, name's Jack Phillips. Pardon me, Jack Phillips. Some years ago, he was approached by a gay couple who wanted one of his masterpiece cakes, and they are masterpieces. I've seen pictures; they are incredible. They one of his masterpiece cakes for their wedding. Jack is a devout Christian, and he said, "No, I can't do that. I will be happy to bake you a cake," which is where everybody gets this story wrong. Everybody says he wouldn't bake them a cake. That's absolutely false. He said he would bake them a cake, whatever they wanted, but he could not decorate it, because to decorate it would be putting his imprimatur on their same-sex wedding. And the Bible says that marriage, is between a man and a woman. And Jack, being a devout Christian, goes along with that. And he was sued. The case went to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and he lost. He took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, where he won. Now, the Supreme Court, of course, ruled very narrowly. They just said that the way the Colorado Civil Rights Commission went after him was very slanted, that it was not done in a fair and just manner. They did not rule that Christian bakeries have the right to refuse to do cakes of any type, any size, for ceremonies that they do not agree with because of their religious beliefs. Well, immediately after that case came down, Jack Phillips got a call from a trans activist. And this trans activist's name is Autumn Scardina. And Autumn is also a transgender attorney. And Autumn called Jack and said, "I want a birthday cake celebrating my gender transition." Well, being a believer in the Bible, Jack said, "I can't do that because the Bible doesn't believe that you can transition your genders. God made man and woman, not man, woman, and whatever those two wanted to be later on in life." I'm putting words in Jack's mouth, but you understand where I'm going. Well, Scardina, predictably, sued immediately. It was a setup from the word go. We all knew it as soon as the word came out. Well, this case is trying to get in front of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission yet again, but Jack has sued, and right now the case is in front of a senior judge named Wiley Y. Daniel. And the judge is looking at Jack's basically injunction against being sued over this, and is right now inclined to agree with the baker, not the transgender lawyer. Now, Scardina was accused of doing this as a setup, but Scardina described it actually as that they were, quote, calling someone's bluff. That's a pretty thin gruel to take someone to court and to try to ruin their livelihood over. What is the difference between a setup and calling someone's bluff? You knew what Jack was going to say. You knew he was going to say no. You did that specifically to get him into court again. and to waste his time and to waste his money defending himself against absolutely bigoted charges. And those are bigoted. Jack has never said he has any animus towards gays or transgenders or anyone. He just doesn't want to have to say that he agrees with it. He sells cakes to all kinds of people all the time. He just won't make you a custom cake. That's the phrase. That's the point. He won't make you a custom cake if he disagrees with you on the basis of his religion. Now, if you went into a halal butcher shop and asked for pork, and the Muslim behind the counter said no, not only no, but hell no, and get out of my store before I call Allah down upon you, and you sued, you would go nowhere in a heartbeat. That case would be tossed before you even let the ink dry on your signature at the bottom of the lawsuit. Yet a Christian baker is now in court for the how manyth, if I may make up a word, time because of his religious beliefs. And let's not forget the poor flower shop owner in Washington State who had the exact same thing happen to her. This is pure religious bigotry and harassment. Now, the Religious Freedom Act, I'm forgetting the full name of it, I believe it's the Religious Freedom and Exercise Act that came out some years ago, was supposed to have solidified your federal rights to not be forced to do something against your religion. And then what happens? Obamacare comes out, and Obama and Biden sue the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic nun organization that tends to the poor and sick. In fact, the poor and sick elderly specifically. And they took them to court to force them to pay for abortions and morning after pills through their government-mandated, quote-unquote, Affordable Health Care Act program. That's what's going on here. And the guy who's in line to become Secretary of DHS, Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, Becerra? Or is it Becerra? I think it's Becerra. But he sued the Little Sisters of the Poor in California when he was California AG there over the same exact thing. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled in their favor. But these are nuns tending to the poor, sick, elderly. And they had to go to court time and time again. And Becerra saying he'll take him to court yet again if he gets confirmed. I'm sure you can tell I'm visibly angry over this kind of stuff. It cannot be allowed to continue. Unfortunately, under 46 asterisk and Harris, you can see no one standing up for the rights of religious conservatives anytime soon. Anytime soon. All right, a little international news real quickly, and then we'll get into the gun block. Israel is voting. Actually, the polls closed by now. I think Israel's about 8 hours ahead of us, 7 hours ahead of us. But they had another vote for prime minister again. Their fourth in 2 years. That parliamentary election in general. But of course, Israel is a representative government like the UK, where you don't have a single party takes the entire win for a particular district if they get more votes than the other guy. They have multiple parties, and they go based on percentages. So let's say if just the Likud party got 30% of the vote, and then the Blue and White party, which is the Likud party's main rival, got 25% of the vote, then in the Knesset, which is Israel's only house of government, they do not have a bicameral government like we do. They have only the single house. then the Likud party would have 5% more representatives in the Knesset than the blue and white party would. That's how it works there. And you have to build coalitions then to become the ruling party unless you win an outright majority in the vote. And Israel has a number of parties that makes that virtually impossible. Hell, there's an Arab Muslim party in Israel. So if you ever hear someone say Israel is an apartheid state or the Muslims have no rights in Israel, if that's the case, then how is it that Muslims can be elected to actual government office and be part of the ruling body in Israel if it's an apartheid state and they have no rights? I think that pretty much ends that discussion right there. Now, Netanyahu has yet to been able to cobble together a really solid coalition after these last 3 elections. And he's not been able to get a majority together. That's why we keep having these. The Blue and White Party is led, it's his main rival, and it's led by a former Likud Party member, and I believe a former Israeli general. He and Bibi had Benjamin Netanyahu, who's known as Bibi, and he and Bibi had a falling out some years ago, and so this guy went and started the Blue and White Party, which of course the colors of the Israeli flag, blue and white. So right now it's a tight race. I don't have any results to show you, but it's neck and neck. And if there's not a clear majority this time, if either party is not able to cobble together a solid majority coalition, then they're going to have another election. It's just the way it works. And I can tell you right now, from the article I read, this is from the Epoch Times, quoting the AP, Israeli voters are tired of these elections. They are absolutely tired of them. And I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. All right, let's get to the gun block. Not sure how long this is going to take. I have a bunch of border news to back up the end of the show. I'm sure you've all seen the pictures of what's happening on the border. The White House finally released some actual photos from the CBP facilities in Donna, Texas, after Project Veritas was able to leak out a number of photos of the same thing. So the White House basically had no choice. But they're still lying about what's going on down there. But the big thing that's going on right now is, of course, the fact that we've had 2 mass shootings in basically a week. Actually, 4 days, excuse me. Things are really coming to a head. Now, let's just touch on the Boulder shooting real quickly. 10 people were killed, including a police officer. The guy in the store, this guy goes into, I should say, a Boulder, Colorado pharmacy store, like a Walgreens. I don't remember the exact name of the store, but goes in while people are lining up for vaccines. And as I understand it, he had an AR-15 and he starts unloading. And shot and killed 9 people. A police officer came running in, and the officer unfortunately was immediately engaged with a high-powered rifle versus his sidearm. And I don't care what body armor you're wearing, unless it's ceramic, it's not going to stop a 5.56 round doing 2,560 feet per second out of the muzzle. It's just not going to stop it unless it's ceramic or steel. So the officer died tragically and heroically. The shooter was shot in the leg ultimately, was arrested, taken out to a waiting ambulance, and then he's being treated in the hospital. I understand he's in stable condition at the moment. But I, of course, will not give out his name. I do not do that. But the big thing, of course, was immediate social media talking about how, yet again, another white man created a mass murder, and how white men are the most dangerous thing in America, without any actual proof of the identity of the shooter. Well, it comes out a few hours later that, in fact, the shooter is Muslim from, I believe, Syria, but definitely from the Middle East. according to his brother, he was bullied in high school and became, quoting the brother specifically, antisocial and also paranoid. The family noticed some problems with the guy not too long ago. We don't know how he got a hold of the weapon. We don't know if there was any actual motive. We just know that he went in and killed 10 people, including a police officer. But that didn't stop Twitter from going nuts, especially because the guy was taken alive. As if only white people are taken alive by police, that everyone else is shot dead. Two things you can be in this country and be hated: Christian and a white man. If you're all three, you shouldn't even bother going outdoors as far as other people are concerned. So I'm going to look at the reactions to the reactions here. Now, of course, the best person to go to for really hot news is Andy Ngo, Jack Posobiec, and a few other people. And Andy Ngo came out almost immediately after the shooter had been identified, and quoting Andy's tweet after he names the shooter, which I disagree with. I do not believe you should hand out the names of shooters so cavalierly. We all know that shooters do it quite a bit for attention. One of the main reasons they do it is for attention. And by publishing their name, you make them famous. And that just lets the next guy know, all I have to do is shoot a bunch of people and my name will become world famous. And if you're sitting around with low self-esteem, you feel the world is against you, making the world suddenly sit up and take notice of you, that's one way of doing it. Again, I don't know the motives of this particular person. I'm just describing to you how his brother described him. Now, again, quoting Andy Ngo's tweet, the shooter was first described as a white male. His social media, which is now deleted, shows he was a religious Muslim who posted frequently about Islamophobia. And Andy quotes Islamophobia since that's really not a thing. And here's one tweet, I should say a series of tweets from this person. The one is, the Muslims at the Christchurch Mosque were not the victims of a single shooter. Another is, yeah, if these racist Islamophobic people would stop hacking my phone and let me have a normal life, I probably could. And then another was, so Mary wears a hijab and Jesus doesn't eat pork. Let me click that open, see if I can find it. I can't read that one. No, that's there it is. So Mary wears her hijab and Jesus doesn't eat pork and prays on his hands and knees. They're both Muslims. It's obvious. So that's this guy. Now, getting into some of these tweets. John Pavlovitz, an author, assumed the man was white and that he received preferential treatment based on his race. And here's quoting Pavlovitz's tweet. In America, if you're white, no matter how many people you kill, you'll be taken into custody alive. Las Vegas shooter. John. Las Vegas shooter. He didn't even come out of that room. Okay? The Sandy Hook shooter. He didn't live. Continuing. John also said, we really need to ban angry white guys with guns. Author and BLM activist Mina Harris had a few tweets. She since deleted them, but once it's out there, folks, it's out there for good. Got to remember that. So Mina tweeted, the Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. Thanks. So Raheem Kassam, who is great, follows up on that, and he says, Twitter allows verified users like Mina Harris to peddle wild disinformation about shootings, terror attacks in real time. If I did this, I'd be suspended immediately. Now Harris then tweeted that she had deleted that tweet and that it was based on, quote, false assumptions. So you're a racist. Why did my camera keep switching? Weird. But you're a racist for having that false assumption, Mina, just so you know. And she was also called out by Zaid Jalani, who tweeted, majority of mass shootings in the United States are not carried out by white men, and even if they were, learn about basic statistical fallacies. The fact near zero number of people ever commit a mass shooting or act of terrorism is more important than X% of quote, race does shootings. And Twitter. Yes, this is the other part I wanted to cover. Twitter actually did this very same thing. Jack Prosobiec pointed this out. Here we have a side-by-side of Elijah McClain. Now, I don't know this person. I don't read Twitter for news. I don't read Twitter at all except to do these stories. So I get my news from the sources you guys see me use. But Elijah had made a couple claims in the trending sections of the politics section of Twitter. Here's one. People are comparing the arrests of the white male suspects at the center of recent shootings in Boulder and Atlanta to the 2019 death of unarmed black man Elijah McClain. Okay. Great. White male suspects. And that, again, is a guy writing for Twitter themselves. All right, one more piece here. Dr. Oni Blackstock. People will continue to die just so that white men can own guns and reinforce the power they already have. And there are more and more and more and more. Let's just not dwell on that. But, of course, keeping the country unified and making sure we don't jump to conclusions is 46 Asterisk, who went on TV not too long ago to explain that Americans need to have their guns taken away. And he wants to bring back the quote-unquote assault weapon ban, which I will dive into in a little detail in just a second. And he's also talking about things like quote-unquote high-capacity magazines, which are also defined in a way that you might be surprised. And again, I'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's hear from 46 Asterisk in his own words. It's about a minute.
While we're still waiting for more information regarding the shooter, his motive, the weapons he used, the guns, the magazines, the weapons, the modifications that apparently have taken place to those weapons that are involved here, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again. I got that done when I was a senator. It passed. It was law for the longest time. And it brought down these mass killings. We should do it again. We can close the loopholes in our background check system, including the Charleston loophole. That's one of the best tools we have right now to prevent gun violence.
Okay, so we have no information other than it was an AR-15. We don't know anything about magazines. We don't know anything about accessories. We don't know anything about modifications. I'm quoting the president himself. And then he said, but I don't need to know. We just need to do this and do it now. No, and no. There has yet to been one of these quote-unquote common sense gun reform laws that the Democrats have been trying to put through Congress for the last how many years, not one of them would have prevented any of these shootings that I'm about to list in a little bit. Not one of them. We have no information as to how this dirtbag, possibly mentally ill dirtbag, got a hold of this firearm. We don't know if it was stolen. We don't know if it was bought illegally. Or we don't know if he lied on the 4473, thereby committing a federal crime. We don't know any of that. Yet the immediate knee-jerk reaction is, ban everything I don't like. So what does Joe Biden mean by assault weapon? Joe Biden means anything that's semi-automatic. That's it. Because you'll know that the Democrats also use the phrase weapons of war. Okay, well, an AR-15 is not a weapon of war. A weapon of war is select fire. Or you can use usually it's semi-auto, 3-round burst, or full auto. Sometimes it's only semi-auto or full burst. A full auto. That is an assault weapon. Technically, that's a military weapon. AR-15s, you cannot do that. If you have an AR-15 that does that, you're going to jail for at least 10 years. Federal prison for at least 10 years. High-capacity magazines. So you might think, well, 30-round magazine, right? As Joe Biden said to that poor steel worker in Ohio last year when he was campaigning, you don't need 300 rounds, whatever that means. You don't need what was that one? What was he said? He said you don't need something that, oh God, he said it so poorly, I don't even remember how it was. It was so nonsensical, I can't remember it. He was trying to describe a high-capacity magazine, but he said it in such an insane way that it made no sense. But the Democrats think that anything over 10 rounds is high capacity. And if you were with me 2 years ago on YouTube, you'll know that I read the court case against Anthony Becerra, then AG of California, where he was taken to court, the state of California, and by extension he, was taken to court over the California ban on magazines holding more than 10 rounds. And the state of California lost in federal court. They lost. So not only is there no federal rule that you can ban a magazine of any capacity, but not even in California can you do that. There just have been other states that have been challenged that way yet. There's legal precedent against this. So let's get into some specifics here. This is a piece of research that was done by Christopher S. Coper, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, with the Jerry Lee Center of Criminology at University of Pennsylvania. Okay, Ivy League school. And the title is An Updated Assessment of the Federal Assault Weapons Ban, Impacts on Gun Markets and Gun Violence, 1994 to 2003. Those were the dates over which the quote-unquote AWB was enforced. From 93 to 2000, or from 2004 to 2003. It was basically a 10-year ban. And it sunsetted and it was never revisited. You know why? Because it didn't make that much of a difference. There was no congressional willpower to re-implement it because it just didn't have that big of an effect. So when 46 Asterisk said that mass shootings went down, at least by an amount so appreciable that it would make sense to do it all over again, he's completely out of his mind. It's not what the data shows. So let me touch real briefly on some terminology. So, the assault weapons ban, technically known as the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, imposed a 10-year ban on the, quote, manufacture, transfer, and possession, close quote, of certain semi-automatic firearms designated as assault weapons, or AWs. The ban is directed at semi-automatic firearms having features that appear useful in military and criminal applications but unnecessary in shooting sports or self-defense. Examples include flash hiders, folding rifle stocks, and threaded barrels for attaching silencers. Of course, they're not silencers, they're suppressors, but I'll get into all that in a second. Let me continue. The law bans 18 models and variations by name, as well as revolving cylinder shotguns. That's a very old design, by the way. It also has a, quote, features test provision banning other semi-automatics having 2 or more military-style features. In sum, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has identified 118 models and variations that are prohibited by the law. A number of the banned guns are foreign semi-automatic rifles that have been banned from importation into the U.S. since 1989. The ban also prohibits most ammunition feeding devices holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition, referred to as large capacity magazines or LCMs. An LCM is arguably the most functionally important feature of most AWs, many of which have magazines holding 30 or more rounds. No, 30 round magazine is the upper limit for any useful use of an AR style weapon. You can get 50 round and 100 round drums, but drums are notoriously finicky as when it comes to feeding, because the spring has to not only force them around as they're fed into the chamber, but it has to force them around a curve, and so you're not getting linear pressure, you're getting angular pressure, which can create binding. So drum magazines are really worthless, but they look great. They have what's known in the business as a huge CDI factor, which means chicks dig it. And they also weigh a lot. So they make the firearm very, very unwieldy. 30 rounds are the normal limit for a magazine of an AR type. Now for a handgun, you can get 30 round magazines for certain semi-automatic pistols, specifically Glocks. There used to be an automatic Glock, which has since been banned, and it could go through a 30 round magazine in less than a second. Just zip. I shouldn't say less than a second, less than 5 seconds. But you can't, if you have one now, it's worth tens of thousands of dollars, and you can't sell it on the open market unless that person has a lot of legal loopholes they've jumped through in order to be able to own an automatic firearm in the U.S., which you can do legally, but they cost so much, it's really a rich man's game. And even if you can afford the firearm, feeding them is another thing entirely. It's one thing to go through a 30-round magazine in semi-automatic fire. It's another thing to go through a 30-round magazine in fully automatic fire. It costs a lot of money to keep feeding that rate of fire, folks. A lot of money. So unless you have commercial reloading equipment, you're not going to be able to afford feeding automatic firearms. So that's another reason they're so rare. Now here's an interesting feature of this statistic. And again, quoting the study, approximately 18% of civilian-owned firearms and 21% of civilian-owned handguns were equipped with large capacity magazines as of 1994. Okay, so this is obviously quite a long time ago, but still, 18% of firearms, I believe he means rifles, and 21% of handguns. So actually more handguns than rifles had quote-unquote large capacity magazines, which is, again, anything over 10 rounds. One more quick note. At the time of the ban, there were upwards of 1.5 million privately owned AWs in the U.S. and nearly 25 million guns equipped with LCMs. Gun industry sources estimated that there were 25 million pre-ban LCMs available in the U.S. as of 1995. An additional 4.7 million pre-ban LCMs were imported into the country from 1995 through 2000, with the largest number in 1999. Okay, so here's the thing. Even though they banned quote unquote, these, again, quote, assault rifles, assault weapons, and large capacity magazines, they didn't make it illegal to own them if you already had one. They didn't, let me repeat myself, it wasn't illegal to own one if you already had it before the ban kicked in. So there were millions of these things out there. 1.5 million guns and tens of millions of pre-ban magazines, LCMs, before 1994. And another 4.7 million pre-ban LCMs were imported from 95 through 2000. Right in the beginning to middle of this ban. How in the hell is that supposed to stop crime to such an extent that it becomes noticeable? And there are many more millions of AR-15s and 30-round magazines. Pardon me. I fell into it myself. AR-15s and semi-automatic handguns and magazines over 10 rounds. There are tens and tens of, if not hundreds of millions of those all over the country. And unless Sleepy Joe gets Robert Francis O'Rourke in, remember his guns are, I'm going to count on you to fix the gun problem in this country. You're going to be my guy. Fort Worth, Texas, last year. Unless they make it to where owning any of these is illegal and punishable by prison time, then they can't say they're doing anything. They just can't. And if you can find me anywhere in the Constitution where it says the government can force you to give them your firearms and magazines, I'd love to read it. Shall not be infringed, folks. Second Amendment. In order to maintain a well-regulated militia, the right to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. The militia part is a subordinate clause. It is not the operative clause. It is a subordinate clause. The operative clause in that sentence is shall not be infringed. And if anyone says, no, we'll buy back your guns, with what money? My money. And if you're going to use government money to buy back, quote unquote, buy back, which means confiscate my guns, then you're using my money to buy my guns. Don't let anyone give you that. Oh, the government will give you money for it. You'll be compensated. No, you're paying the government to take away your property. It's the way it is with any government sale. All right, let's move on. So I was just talking about the things that made a firearm an assault weapon, according to the bill we just discussed, the quote-unquote AWB. So I got a picture here of two Ruger Mini 14s. And this is from Reason.com. Okay, Jacob Sullum from September of 19. And he goes after a particular study done by some folks who, quote unquote, determined that the 94 2003 AWB period did in fact result in the noticeable decline of mass murders. We'll get into the definition of that in just a second. But look at this picture here in front of you. These are two Ruger Mini 14s, one of the most popular firearms in the world. In the world. They're cheap, they're accurate, and they're fun to shoot. Both of these shoot either .223 or .556 ammunition. .223 is the caliber, which is just a little smaller than a 5.56 millimeter, which is the quote-unquote NATO round. All NATO firearms are supposed to, or I should say rifles, service rifles are supposed to use 5.56. Again, that's millimeters. It's basically .22 caliber. But they're very fast. They have a lot of powder. The bullet weighs about 55 grains, which is about 25%, 30% more than your standard 22 round, just single 22 pistol round. And you can get upwards of 72, 75 grains for the really long range, heavy duty stuff. But that's more specialty shooting. But look at these two rifles. You can see the one on top. You can see the stock there on the left. You may be able to make it out. There's a handle at the bottom of the stock there. That is a lever that you can use to pull a pin that allows you to lengthen and shorten the stock. That what gives you what's known length of pull, the length between your shoulder and your finger as it sits on the trigger. That's called length of pull. And you want that to be accurate enough to where you're not extending your arm too much or have it flexed too much to where you've got a lot of muscle tension in your arm. That's what length of pull is there for. So with a fixed stock, like on the bottom rifle, length of pull is what you get, unless you add or subtract from the stock yourself. But with the collapsible stock, also known as a multi-position stock, like you see on the above rifle, the tactical rifle, as opposed to the ranch rifle on the bottom, that allows you to adjust the pull in one of three settings. And it also allows you to carry the firearm in a smaller case than you would need if it had a fixed stock. When I transport my AR, I always collapse the stock. Thereby it fits in the case a lot better. And then when I take it out, I believe I use the medium setting for my length of pull. Now another thing you'll notice as a difference between these two rifles is the lack of a pistol grip on the lower rifle. It just has a standard rifle stock. Does that make a big difference? Not really. Not really. Magazines, you can see they're exactly the same. And the barrels are almost exactly the same length, except I should say that the one on the upper rifle, the tactical rifle, is shorter. The reason it's the same length is because it has a flash suppressor on the front of it, also known as a bird cage. There are a number of different flash suppressor types out there, but the most common is known as a bird cage. It's a cylinder with 3 slots cut in it, and then the gases expand out the sides so that you don't have this big flash coming out the front of the muzzle as the unignited, or I should say as the gunpowder flash exits the barrel behind the bullet. It disperses the flash. Okay? So when you're shooting at night, it makes a big difference. Now, I just read you that piece a moment ago where it said that things like collapsible stocks and pistol grips and flash suppressors make it bad, that they're not needed. Okay, well, you can argue about the pistol grip back and forth. I can shoot either way. I'm fine. Pistol grip does give you slightly more controllability, but not to the point where it makes a huge difference. A forward grip makes a big difference, and that was something that was banned in the 94-2003 AWB ban. Another thing that was banned is a threaded barrel. Now, I got this wrong last week, and I want to apologize. When I read threaded barrel, my mind immediately jumped to the lands and grooves cut inside the barrel of basically every firearm that isn't a smoothbore shotgun or a musket. I got that wrong. What they meant is threaded to attach a suppressor. Suppressors have 2 ways of mounting to a rifle, or a pistol for that matter. There is either the bayonet type, where they lock in on lugs. You push them in and then you turn it, and the lugs lock in place. That's the bayonet type. And then you have the screw type, or the threaded type, where the barrel has a thread cut on it, just like on a screw or a bolt, and then the suppressor twists onto the barrel. Now the thing with the screw type, the threaded type, is it takes longer to put on and take off, and it is very easy to do what they call cross-threading, which is where you start off and the threads between the barrel and the suppressor are not lined up just right, and you start to cut into the threads between the two pieces, and that ruins it. And it's very easy to do because these are really fine threads. They're spaced very close together. The coarser the threads, the farther apart they are, the harder it is to cross-thread something. But fine threads are really easy to cross-thread. And suppressors, you've got a lot of circumference usually, especially on the bigger ones. So you got a lot of torque in there. So that cross-threading is very simple to do. But that's where threading comes in. Now you notice they didn't say that you couldn't have lugs on the barrel. They just said threaded. So what they really need to say is whether or not you can be suppressed at all or not. So let's talk about suppressors real quickly. Suppressors do not make guns silent. That James Bond thing where it goes pew pew, that's completely false. You hear it. You hear it. At the very least, you will hear the action of the slide banging back and forth. The faster you fire, the more that bang, bang, bang is going to be heard. There will be a report. The only way you can avoid any kind of noise is if you do it single shot and if you do it with a round that is subsonic, that does not go faster than the speed of sound. Anytime a bullet goes through the speed of sound, it leaves a crack, basically a sonic boom. And if you've ever been around firearms, you've heard it, and you know exactly what it sounds like. You know exactly what it sounds like. And that is why in Europe, almost all hunting rifles are suppressed. Yes, Europe has basically zero suppressor laws because they like being around other people. And they don't mind if you're out hunting. They just don't want your dog losing its mind when this huge report goes off, this huge gun blast goes off. A suppressor knocks it down enough to where, if you do hear it, it's not massive. Some guns, if you have a suppressor, you don't need ear protection. Some, but not many. That's how loud it still is. It just takes away the big concussion and the big boom. And trust me, I know what the concussion of a muzzle blast feels like. I laid right next to a Barrett BFG 50 caliber once, and it almost knocked me over on my side. And that's with its recoil management that actually blasts the recoil out and down the sides. But this is what they're talking about when they're talking about a quote-unquote assault weapon. Back in 1994, now they're talking about anything semi-automatic. So now, even this Ruger Mini 14 ranch rifle right here, that would be banned. And especially that magazine would be banned. And I guarantee you they're going to try to make it to where owning one would be illegal. Not buying one, but owning one would be illegal. Just wait and see. Now, as far as the quote-unquote Charleston loophole goes, where if your sale is in kickback out of the background check system in less than 3 days, you get the gun anyway. I don't know enough about that to have an opinion one way or the other. I don't like the idea of gun rights being restricted any more than they should be, but I'm not going to argue for or against it. Let me just put it that way. I'm going to leave that out of the mix. All right, let's move on. So the other thing we hear about is that these evil black rifles are the cause of all mass shootings. That's what does it. That's what does it, these evil black rifles. No. No, not even close. Not even close. I've got a graphic here in front of you. This is from Statista.com. And this is from this year. And it shows quite specifically three sets of columns. The column on the far left is the number of handguns used, both number of handguns used in an incident and number of incidents. And next to that is rifles, and then following that is shotguns. And as you can see, handguns are by far and away the most prevalent. By far and away. By more than a factor of 2 over rifles. Now, we're not just talking about AR-15s when it says rifles. Remember the Vegas shooting, which was the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. 56 people killed and hundreds and hundreds wounded. None of those were AR-15s. So we're talking about all rifles here. And also, so let's just dig into this, and I'll get into more specifics in a second. So handguns, you can see on the blue bar, that is the number of weapons used. So 143 weapons used out of 95 incidents. So about, what is that, 1.5 handguns per incident. So obviously it's somewhat likely that a mass shooter using a pistol will have more than one on them. Now, you guys know how I like to carry. I'm on YouTube right now, so I can't say specifically. But you know how I like to carry. And that would put me in one of those categories. So let's move on. Let's go to rifles. 56 total rifles used out of 48 incidents. So the prevalence of more than one rifle in these mass shootings is low. Is low. And again, we're talking 48 incidents versus 95 with handguns. 48 with rifles, 95 with handguns. So over, I should say, basically twice as much. My math, 2 times 48 is 96, so it's virtually twice as many handguns versus rifles. And again, many times more likely to have multiple handguns than you would be multiple rifles. And then finally, we have shotguns, and we have 30 shotguns used in a total of 26 incidents. So again, a very low percentage of multiple shotguns being used in the same shooting, but it does happen. Okay, so that blows away the narrative that all of these evil black rifles are causing all of these mass shootings. Now, yes, a number of the worst mass shootings have involved AR-15 style rifles. And I say style because there are a number of different versions out there. I should have been using that all along. I apologize. Sandy Hook, that was a rifle and, I believe, 1 or 2 handguns. Stoneman Douglas, that was an AR-15. The Orlando nightclub shooting, the Pulse nightclub shooting, that was an AR. And I believe a handgun. But University of Virginia, at the time, the worst mass shooting in U.S. history, with 34 students at UVA shot and killed, not to mention how many wounded. Handgun. Some nut job roaming the campus, just picking people off. All around campus, picking people off. No one had a gun to stop him. But so it's not always these evil black rifles, by far. So again, tragically, we lost 8 people in Atlanta last week, and we lost 10 people in Boulder yesterday, including a police officer. I did some math, and I added up the number killed and wounded in Chicago just over the weekends since the last week in February to last weekend. So 4 weeks. And I've got some headlines here from CBS 2 Chicago. This is from March 1st, so the last weekend in February. There were 5 killed and 20 wounded in Chicago. The next week, 22 shot at least and 2 killed. That's the first weekend in March. Second weekend in March, 40 shot, 4 killed. Again, at least. And 2 dead and 13 wounded in one mass shooting, as they describe it. And then finally, this last weekend, 21 shot, at least, 4 killed in weekend gun violence in Chicago. Police officer, 10-year-old boy among those wounded. So I did the math. You can't see it on your screen. I had them over here on the second monitor. But those total up to 18 dead and 113 shot. At least 113 in just 4 weekends in Chicago. And that doesn't include anything that happened between Monday and Friday afternoon. This is just basically from Friday night to Sunday night. $113 shot and 18 killed. Where is the outcry for these lives? Almost exclusively black. Almost exclusively black. Well, there has been a little bit. Cori Bush. Cori Bush is the latest representative from the St. Louis area. Cori Bush, you may know, she is a BLM activist. She got radicalized after the Ferguson event, the Michael Brown shooting. Excuse me. And she ran on that and got elected as a representative to the U.S. Congress from Missouri, from the St. Louis area. She said what she was. The voters wanted her in, and they got it. Okay, good. Legal vote. They were tallied up. Cori Bush won. Fine, good. Do your job. And Cori's trying. She's trying to do her job. She came out and had this tweet from this morning. 26 lives taken in Newton should have led to change. 9 lives taken in Charleston should have led to change. 17 lives taken in Parkland should have led to change. 10 lives taken in Boulder needs to lead to change. Our hearts cannot break anymore. We need gun control now. Okay. Well, real quickly, all of those have a couple things in common. They're either white shooters or kids were involved. Now, Parkland, not white. And Charleston, no kids. But otherwise, they all fit one of the 2 categories. Now, Cori's, of course, assuming that the Boulder shooter is white. It's obvious. But so Cori Bush obviously is in tune with gun violence, right? She knows what needs to be done. We need, quote unquote, I'm not saying it's all true, just the way they put it, common sense gun laws. And that'll prevent these mass shootings. Right? Yeah, even though one law they have proposed in the last 15, 20 years has yet to show to have been able to have eliminated any one of the last 15, 20 mass shootings that have happened. They never have anything about that. Scully mentions in the D-Life chat, Ruby's Cafeteria, 23 shot and killed, 27 injured in Killeen, Texas. Yes, that's absolutely true. I have not eaten at that Ruby's, but I do know where it's at. That was a horrific thing. And what stopped that? A good guy with a gun. A good guy with a gun ultimately stopped that. Otherwise, that whole place would have been shot. So let's bring that part up. In fact, You just saw those numbers for mass shootings, right? In the hundreds. But you know how many times guns are used defensively each year and potentially save a life? Anywhere from 500,000 to 3 million. Now, it's such a wide range because very many times people don't report that they went for a gun and someone ran away. Or they'll tell a friend, but they won't report it to the police because there technically wasn't a crime committed. So what do you report? I reached for a gun and the guy ran away? Where's the crime? So that's an estimate, but the very bottom end, 500,000 out of the tens of thousands of gun deaths every year, of which many are attributable to suicide, not murder. So anyway, so this is Cori Bush's take on what's happening right now, that we need gun laws. Okay, well, I looked up, just did a general DuckDuckGo search, Cori Bush gun violence. And I came up with this. This is a press release from her congressional office from back on the 11th of this month. And it starts out very strong. Let me read it to you. Now, this is, of course, in support of H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446, the two gun control laws that the House is trying to get rammed through and to go to the Senate, where they would need the filibuster to be broken in order to pass. Even though there are a few Republicans who are on board, I don't think there are enough to get over the 60-vote filibuster requirement. But this is Congresswoman Bush's lead-in, and it makes perfect sense. I'll quote her. Every single day, gun violence is claiming the lives of St. Louisians. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So far this year, dozens of people have been murdered in the St. Louis region. Just this week, a mother and her 2 children were shot and killed, and a toddler was grazed by a bullet. The devastation and trauma that gun violence has inflicted on our community is unbearable, unjust, and unconscionable. If we want to end gun violence in St. Louis and across the country, we must tackle the issue from every angle. So she talks about how the House went forward with those 2 bills. But then she says this. We have to address the root causes of violence. We must invest in affordable housing, quality education, safe parks and green space, good paying jobs, comprehensive mental health and trauma services, and other supports that will help all of our people. Not one mention of getting black fathers into homes with their children, specifically black sons. The statistics of how likely a black man is, even a black teenager, to drop out of school, get arrested, and possibly get murdered are astronomical in single parent, single mother, specifically black homes. Astronomical compared to homes with a father present. Now, I'm not saying every father is perfect, far from it. I know one in particular who's a complete son of a bitch. But you take it as you get it. But on average, by far and away on average, having a father in a home is proven to keep these kids out of trouble and in school. And as we all know, the 3 ways to avoid poverty, it works about 97% of the time. Don't have kids out of marriage, finish high school, and get a job, any kind of job out of school. You do those 3 things, and you are almost guaranteed to never be in poverty. Cori Bush does not address that in the slightest. In the slightest. All right, let's move on. Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer tweeted this morning, at almost exactly the same time as Cori Bush. My heart goes out to the people of Boulder and the families of those who lost their lives. This unrelenting epidemic of gun violence steals innocent lives with alarming regularity in America. I will bring universal background checks legislation to the Senate floor. Okay, we don't know anything about how the Boulder shooter got the gun. I don't even think we know how the Atlanta shooter got the gun just yet. I haven't heard. So I'll look it up, but I haven't heard. And normally that's one of the first things that's released. That's the one thing ATF does when it gets on the job, when it gets on the scene of a mass shooting, is it runs the serial number of the gun or guns and lets you know if they were purchased legally or not. And I haven't heard that with Atlanta yet. And we certainly don't know in Colorado yet. So Chuck Schumer is fixing a problem that he doesn't know exists. And again, any of the last many mass shootings I've described in specific detail, none of them would have been prevented by a new gun law. None of them. So I also did a search for Chuck Schumer and gun violence, and I didn't get much. But I did get something on Chuck Schumer and violence, specifically hate crimes regarding the Jewish community. Now, this came from Chuck's office back in March of 2018. And as you'll know, there were a couple pretty horrific crimes at synagogues in America in rather close proximity to each other, date-wise, at that time. And especially the one in Philadelphia, at the, I forget, the Green Tree Synagogue, I believe it was called. Green Tree of Life Synagogue. I suddenly forgot. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. I don't mean to belittle the lives of those people at all. I just don't have the memory to remember stuff like that. But so Chuck Schumer came out with Senator Kristen Gillibrand, again, March of 2018, and they proposed a spending bill, and it passed, and it had $60 million in funding for the nonprofit security grant program, and I'll quote him here, which more than doubles the $25 million in federal funding provided to the program last year. The nonprofit security grant program provides funding support for target hardening and other physical security enhancements to nonprofit organizations that are at high risk of a terrorist attack. And he's saying specifically Jewish community centers, also known as JCCs, Jewish schools, and congregations of all kind. And he wants them to keep them safe and protected from potential racial and religious hate crimes and terror attacks. Okay, well, I'm almost done. I stand united, again quoting Chuck Schumer, I stand united with every community across America targeted by hate, against fear, intolerance, and intimidation. Okay, that's great. That's great. Here's the thing, though. The vast majority of anti-Semitic hate crimes in New York State do not occur at any of these places. They are street violence. And most often, black offenders against Orthodox Jews. And even more specifically, Hasidim, or Hasidic Jews. I always say that wrong. Please forgive me. Hasidic Jews. Hasidim, I believe that's how it's pronounced. Because you can see them easily, even in the dark, because of their distinctive hair locks down each temple, and the coats and the hats that they normally wear. They're very identifiable. And that makes them incredibly easy targets. And it's been happening at greater and greater frequencies. And it was rarely, if ever, addressed by de Blasio at all. And if he did mention it, it was in passing. And I've yet to find anything where Chuck Schumer came out specifically against these hate crimes. I'm not saying they're not moral people. I'm not saying their hearts aren't in the right place. But they obviously have selective enforcement in mind. That's all I'm going to say. All right, we've gone along. No learning curve on the way out again, you guys. I'm going to do a hard out. I'm going to try and get all of this block onto Gab TV. And again, I did not break off today. We were on YouTube the whole time as well. Tomorrow, I have no idea what we're going to find tomorrow. But at least I was able to get through the entire gun block without having to cut it short. So that worked out. So be well, God bless. Happy trails. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye. And pray for Picasso. She's had a rough day. I'll leave it at that. Talk to you later, all. Hasidim. Thank you, Laura. Hasidim. I needed that. All right. Bye-bye, all.